Shawn Michaels, in my opinion, is one of the greatest professional wrestlers of all time. While wrestling insiders and smart fans like to revel in Shawn's shortcomings in regards to his backstage behaviour and political power plays during the 90s, no one can say that the guy wasn't good in the ring. He was more than good, he was a legitimate showstopper. You could almost guarantee that when Shawn Michaels stepped into a wrestling ring, you were going to see a great match no matter who his opponent would be. And yes, Shawn's actions backstage may have been a little cutthroat, and there's no real way to defend some of his actions, but if you're a professional wrestling fan who loves the art of professional wrestling, Shawn Michaels will deliver the goods each and every time. On Shawn's journey to become a showstopper though, many changes had to be made to how he worked and how he presented himself to audiences. Shawn came into the WWF with his tag team partner Marty Jannetty, and the two men worked as the Rockers, an extremely popular high-flying tag team that had been fired from the WWF in 1987 and rehired the following year. Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty were money though. Their unique style incorporated high-risk double-team moves that excited fans of the World Wrestling Federation, especially younger fans and, of course, female fans. Shawn Michaels, though, wanted more. HBK always saw himself eventually becoming a singles competitor. He didn't want to remain a rocker for the remainder of his career, and to be fair, leaving the Rockers would be one of the best things Shawn Michaels could have done in the early 90s. Today's video then will take a look at the Rockers breaking up and how Shawn Michaels became a standout superstar within the World Wrestling Federation. The Rockers first began teaming up in 1985, with the duo really finding their feet in Verne Gagne's AWA in 1986. I don't want to linger on the Rockers' history too long, as I already put a video together looking at the Rockers' tag team run, but all you really need to know is that Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty had been teaming up for close to 7 years. While working in the territories and in the AWA, Shawn and Marty were able to go their separate ways after working their matches, but in the WWF, the schedule was so hectic that both men ended up spending every minute of the day together. During their WWF run, Marty and Shawn did not leave each other's side at all. They drove together, they ate together, they shared hotel rooms, they wrestled together, went to the gym together, and of course, they partied together. Being attached at the hip like this to anyone would be enough to drive a wedge into any relationship, but when you mix in the fast living lifestyle of a professional wrestler, especially during the 80s and early 90s, you can only imagine how trying even the most trivial of things would become. The Rockers would implode backstage, and it was personal issues that caused the team to break up. It wasn't as cut and dry as the WWF made out though. These two men were having some serious problems backstage, and the cause of all of this can be summed up with just one word: ego. There were two reported incidents that we can point to here, both of which give us a real insight to the relationship Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty really had with each other. In Shawn Michaels' autobiography and in his DVD documentary Heartbreak Triumph, in the bonus section, Shawn talks about a legitimate fight he and Marty had back in May of 1991 that was unintentionally instigated by Roddy Piper. Marty, Shawn and Piper had been drinking, and during their drunken conversation, Piper mentioned that Shawn had an incredible amount of talent, and Michaels himself was the future of the wrestling business. Marty, standing there listening to all of this praise being placed on his tag team partner, took offence and challenged Shawn to a fight right there and right then. Shawn apparently declined, but this didn't stop Marty throwing punches. Piper broke up the fight, Shawn passed out and didn't wake up until the next day, and Marty, according to Marty Jannetty himself, was about to get arrested until Randy Savage showed up, telling police that the fight was part of a wrestling storyline, even though the Macho Man had no idea why the fight started in the first place. That part may seem a little far-fetched, but you have to admit it does make for a great story. The two men did have a fight though, and it all started over one guy being perceived as better as the other. Egos got in the way, and this incident here can definitely be seen as the beginning of the end for Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty. The second story we have concerns Vince McMahon himself, and again it also concerns the Rocker's ego. Inside the pages of Shawn's autobiography, there's a tale about a photo shoot for a cereal box, and Shawn says himself that this incident was the catalyst for the eventual demise of the Rockers. Now, I struggled to find any information about this online, but if you turn to page 153 in Shawn's Heartbreak and Triumph book, that's the hardback edition, it's all there. So, the Road Warriors were also part of this photo shoot, and the Rockers found out that Hawk and Animal were getting paid $5,000 each for posing in front of the camera, whereas Shawn and Marty were only getting $2,500 each. Immediately following the photo shoot, Marty told Shawn he was phoning the office and putting in their notice. Marty also told Shawn, before the whole photo shoot happened, that he had been in touch with Magnum TA over at WCW and a spot was available for the Rockers, paying more than their current WWF contracts, by the way, so the plan here was to phone Vince McMahon, give notice and leave for World Championship Wrestling. Marty asked Shawn if he was definitely with him on this, and Shawn said yes. Shawn revealed in his book though that he didn't really mean it, and in the back of Shawn's mind, this was all a mistake by payroll. He and Marty would end up just getting paid the same amount of money as what the Legion of Doom did, and everything would be okay. Well, at least that's what Shawn thought. Marty phoned the WWF offices, no counter-offer was made by the World Wrestling Federation, and now the Rockers were free to join WCW. Realising he just made a huge mistake, Shawn planned to call the offices and try to get his job back, but before he could make the call, Vince McMahon himself phoned Shawn. Vince said he was sorry that Shawn was leaving, explaining that he didn't have the money to pay Marty and Shawn the same amount as the Road Warriors, but Vince wanted to get the Rockers some exposure by appearing on the cereal boxes. Vince said that once the tag team of Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty fizzles out, Shawn would be welcome to come back to the WWF to begin a singles run. Shawn explained to Vince that he didn't want to leave, but he was upset about the photo shoot payoff. Shawn said he would call Vince back, and then HBK immediately called Marty. Shawn asked Marty what were the Rockers going to do, explaining that Vince was on the phone sounding quite eager to at least keep Shawn. Marty said they could go to WCW, it wouldn't be a problem. Shawn questioned Marty further, and it turned out that Marty had not been in touch with Magnum TA at all, but instead, Marty was in contact with Joey Maggs, better known as Jumping Joey Maggs to fans of WCW. Furious, Shawn phoned Magnum TA himself. Magnum offered the Rockers substantially less money than what Marty had told Shawn previously. Shawn went back to Marty and ripped him apart for putting his whole career in jeopardy, telling Marty he is going back to Vince to take him up on his offer of becoming a single star. HBK also said that Marty was welcome to go back to Vince so the Rockers could officially break up on TV, and the two could then begin a feud where Shawn would be the bad guy and Marty could be the babyface. Marty didn't want to do it initially, he didn't want the Rockers to break up. It was easy money for Marty at the end of the day, but Shawn wanted more. He wanted to be a single star, something that Marty was totally oblivious to during the heyday of the Rockers. Marty agreed to stay with the World Wrestling Federation. Shawn went back to Vince, the split and the heel turn was agreed upon, and both men remained employed by the WWF. Shawn wrote in his book, Marty was not happy about the split. He slanted the story of what happened so that I was the bad guy. He told people that I said that we would stick together on this. That was true, but he never told me that he was going to give Vince an ultimatum. I believe anyone in my position would have done the same thing I did. This was one of my first major decisions, and I was made to feel bad for it. Everyone believed I had dumped Marty and acted like a scumbag. It wasn't true, and it hurt to be labelled as the bad guy. The Rockers had travelled many miles together over the years, and there's always a touch of sadness when relationships end. However, it was time to move on. I was eager to start a whole new chapter in my career. So before we get to the barbershop, we need to look at Shawn and Marty's journey towards the infamous segment that featured the official breakup of one of the WWF's most popular tag teams. Our first stop is at the 1991 Survivor Series, the Rockers teaming up with the Bushwhackers to take on the Nasty Boys and the Beverly Brothers. If you want proof that the Rockers were still adored by fans towards the end of their run, just listen to the ovation they get at the Survivor Series here. Anyway, the Bushwhackers got eliminated, leaving Shawn and Marty taking on 4 guys in this traditional Survivor Series match, and it seemed like the Rockers maybe could have won the match when they eliminated Bo Beverly. Things went downhill though when Marty Jannetty inadvertently hit Shawn while scooping up Jerry Saggs for a slam, causing Shawn to get eliminated. Shawn threw a tantrum in the ring and the audience gasped when Marty tried to console Shawn, but Michaels pushed his tag partner away. Shawn left the ring, the numbers were too much for Marty, and the heel Survivor Series team won the match. Just a quick note here because I know people will bring it up. Shawn kicked out of the pinfall right at 3. Gorilla Monsoon and Bobby Heenan said on commentary that Shawn kicked out in time and he wasn't eliminated, but that's debatable too. I think the plan was always for Shawn to get pinned here, but the timing of the kickout was just a little early. Moving on, the 23rd of December episode of Superstars featured the Rockers in tag team action, and Shawn was acting up during the entire match. Not only was he displaying a more arrogant attitude, but he didn't even tag Marty into the match, easily winning by himself as Marty looked on in disbelief. The next week, again on Superstars, the Rockers faced the Legion of Doom. What should have been a tag team match for the ages turned into the Rockers' final match together, at least on TV. Keep in mind that this episode of Superstars was taped on the 4th of December 1991 and it aired on the 28th of the same month. So Shawn and Marty continued working house shows together until this episode of Superstars aired on TV. Shawn did tag his partner into the match this time. It seemed like the two were maybe back on the same page as the Rockers displayed the double team moves that they were known for, but Shawn drop kicked Animal, which led to the Road Warrior falling on top of Jannetty, and the Legion of Doom won the match. The Rockers argued after the bell. Shawn slapped Marty twice, but Marty wouldn't fight back. Jannetty left Michaels standing in the ring. Shawn basked in the negative reaction from the audience, and everything was going to plan. The Barber Shop was an interview segment on WWF television shows hosted by Brutus the Barber Beefcake. These segments were in the same vein as Piper's Pit, but, of course, they were not nearly as successful as Roddy Piper's well-revered interview show. That being said, when Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty appeared on The Barber Shop during the January 11th, 1992 edition of WWF Wrestling Challenge, fans would get treated to a moment that is still well remembered today. Brutus wanted to bring the Rockers onto his show in hopes of getting both men to settle their differences, but what would end up happening would legitimately shock wrestling fans. Marty wanted the Rockers to stay together. He told Shawn that he would turn his back, and if Shawn Michaels was still there when Marty turned back around, they would go on and rock the world as a tag team. If Shawn was gone when Marty turned back around, then the Rockers would go their separate ways. Shawn grabbed Marty and shook him by the hand. It looked like all was forgiven and things would get back to normal just for a brief moment, but then Shawn Michaels kicked Marty in the face. The audience booed Michaels, but Shawn wasn't done yet. Shawn grabbed Marty by the head and rammed Marty through the barber shop window. Marty began to bleed as Shawn kicked Jannetty while he was down. This whole segment, by the way, was planned by Marty and Shawn. The Rockers were originally going to do the barbershop window gimmick with the Nasty Boys, but Shawn felt this was the perfect way to break up the Rockers for good, and he was absolutely right. After Shawn put Marty through the window, he ripped up a copy of the WWF magazine that contained a story regarding the possible breakup of the Rockers. I looked this magazine up and I read the article, and there is nothing of substance there, by the way. The magazine article spoke about an informer who overheard Shawn and Marty arguing backstage, so there was nothing really juicy in this article, but to give the WWF credit, they advertised this section of the magazine during the whole Rockers breakup angle, and I'm sure they sold a few extra copies because of the exposure on TV. Nonetheless, Shawn got what he wanted. He was now a single star. The initial plan was the most obvious plan. Shawn Michaels was to feud with Marty Jannetty over the next few months, and if the program was captivating enough, the two could go at it at WrestleMania 8. Unfortunately, within days of breaking up with Michaels, Marty found himself in trouble with the law and with the WWF, resulting in Jannetty getting fired. This kinda put Shawn in a bad spot also. His whole heel turn was based around the breakup of the Rockers, so not being able to go straight into the Marty Jannetty program was definitely a problem. Towards the end of the year, Marty came back and the barbershop storyline picked up right where it left off, leading to a match between Shawn and Marty at the 1993 Royal Rumble, but it was too little too late by this point. But anyway, we need to go back to see how the rocker Shawn Michaels changed his whole persona to become the Heartbreak Kid. After the barbershop window incident and after Marty got himself fired, Shawn had to come up with a new gimmick that would set him apart from everyone else. He needed to stand out as a single star in the land of the giants. Shawn would become a vain, narcissistic and self-indulgent character, every girl's dream and every man's nightmare. The first real glimpse we got of this new character was at the 1992 Royal Rumble. Shawn was part of the Rumble match held on January 19th, and he even had a backstage interview before the match. Shawn said during this interview that Marty Jannetty should be thanking him for what he done during the barbershop segment, as Marty now didn't have to enter the Royal Rumble and take a beating from 29 other guys. Shawn also promised to win the Royal Rumble match itself. He entered the match at number 6 and lasted around 15 minutes. After the Rumble match, Shawn found himself working against guys like Jim Powers and Jimmy Snuka. He had the look and he had the ability, but something was still missing for sure. Sensational Sherri would be the missing ingredient here. When Sherri was partnered up with Shawn Michaels, it added a whole bunch of new layers to the character Shawn was trying to portray. It was actually Pat Patterson's idea to put Sherri with Shawn Michaels. Sensational Sherri had only really been associated with top guys in the World Wrestling Federation, having just came from managing the likes of Ted DiBiase and Randy Savage. Putting Sherri with Shawn Michaels gave Shawn credibility through association. If we as fans perceived Sherri as someone who only managed the best bad guys in the World Wrestling Federation, then anyone she would side with would instantly get elevated. On the March 7th, 1992 episode of Superstars, Shawn Michaels debuted his new theme song as he and Sensational Sherri came to the ring, a song called Sexy Boy, written by Jimmy Hart and including vocals from Sensational Sherri herself. And this song fit the character Shawn Michaels was trying to portray perfectly. Sexy Boy is one of those timeless wrestling theme songs. You know what to expect when you hear the first beat of the track, and Sherri lending her vocals for the original version went a long way in giving Shawn more identity. Mr. Perfect has been credited by Shawn Michaels himself as the man who came up with the name Heartbreak Kid. Kurt Hennig would do colour commentary for television shows around this time period, and Shawn says the Heartbreak Kid name stuck after Kurt said it on TV. I should also note though that initially, Shawn wasn't keen on the theme song nor the Heartbreak Kid name. It took him a while to get used to these new elements of his gimmick, but as we all know, both the song and the name served him incredibly well. HBK went on to have a string of house show matches with Jim Powers and Virgil before making his singles WrestleMania debut, a victory over Tito Santana here that actually wasn't a bad match at all. Shawn got a lucky win in the end. We didn't get to see Mr. WrestleMania pull out all the stops by any stretch of the imagination, but what you should take away from this WrestleMania 8 match is that the Heartbreak Kid had officially arrived at this point. Shawn may have been in the opening match here, but there are two things that really get highlighted during this match. The first thing you'll notice is that Shawn was now totally comfortable with his new character, and he was comfortable working with Sensational Sherri. The two complemented each other really well, and when you consider that Shawn had a pretty vanilla look during his rocker days, the Heartbreak Kid came out at WrestleMania 8 looking like a total superstar. The other noticeable aspect of this match is that Shawn proved that he could deliver the goods when it came to singles competition on a grand stage. Shawn may have been working in the opening match here, but this Tito Santana bout was better than some of the key matches at WrestleMania 8. Shawn was already showing that he could and would work harder than those on the higher pay scale. You have to remember too that for the longest time, Shawn was working as a high-flying rocker. His moveset was all about double team moves, high-risk moves, moves that were performed to get the audience to cheer and applaud. If you look at the Tito Santana match, there's now a complete shift in moveset that makes it seem like Shawn was now a completely different wrestler. He still worked fast for sure, but he was also more grounded. He took his time. He now had an opportunity to tell the stories that he wanted to tell in the ring, as opposed to simply making the crowd applaud for flashy moves. And then you had Sensational Sherri there too. There's nothing quite like the heat a good heel manager can bring to a match, and Sherri done her job here to perfection. HBK, to me, truly arrived at WrestleMania 8, and the sky was the limit from this point forward. As Shawn made his way back up the entranceway after his match, Bobby Heenan said on commentary that we are looking at a star of the 90s. If only the brain knew how accurate those words would end up becoming. And so this ends our look at how Shawn Michaels went from a rocker to becoming the Heartbreak Kid. Breaking up with Marty, I feel, was the right thing to do in the end. While it can be argued that the Rockers were still hot as a tag team towards the end of 1991, there is evidence here that Marty could have potentially held Shawn back had the team stayed together. Shawn was no saint at all, but when stories emerged of Jannetty getting arrested and, of course, getting fired multiple times by the WWF, then you best believe that Shawn maybe dodged a bullet by letting go of his tag team partner. Shawn's next goal then was the Intercontinental title, the Workers' title, the championship that had proven to be a stepping stone that led to bigger and better things. In the future, you know we will pick this story back up and look at HBK's time as the Intercontinental Champion. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and thank you very much for watching.